Hello and welcome. My name is Brett Miyazaki. I'm with Bamboo HR, and I'll be helping moderate the webinar today. We're excited to be partnering with Lattice on today's webinar, Driving Better Performance with Better Feedback in 2020. We have some really great content for you today, but before we get to know our presenters a little more, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. First off, we're happy you're joining us today. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar using the chat feature on the interface. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, time permitting, and we'll address as many questions as we can. Also, we will be sending out a copy of the slide deck and recording of the webinar to all registrants within three business days. So check your inbox for that. Make sure to also check your spam folder if you don't see it hit your inbox, as some filters move our emails there. Lastly, this webinar does qualify for 1 hour of SHRM credit. If you attend for at least 50 minutes of today's webinar, you'll automatically receive the certification within the next 3 business days. Our system tracks your time automatically, so you shouldn't need to worry about tracking your time. We have some amazing presenters today. First off, we have Cassie Whitlock, who's the Director of Human Resources at Bamboo HR. Cassie started her career in the accounting world, but working with small and medium-sized business companies. The HR function was always handed to her. She loves the intersection of business and humans and believes that when companies focus on the human aspect of their people, the people in turn focus on the business needs. She enjoys her work most when she can take her talent in data, processes, and human psychology to make someone's day better. She believes that strategy is accomplished in the details of how you manage the daily tactical items. A quick humor and a thoughtful, listening nature are the mark of her leadership style. She views her team as part of her family and enjoys working hard with them while they all learn and grow and execute on business-critical initiatives. Annette Cardwell is the head of content at Lattice. Annette runs all content operations at Lattice. Previously, she ran editorial and video teams for companies like Brit & Co., Fandom, and Yahoo. At Lattice, she creates content to help employees, managers, and HR/people leaders find more meaning in work, create better workplace culture, and build high-performing teams who love what they do and where they work. And with that, I'll hand it over to Annette.
All right, great. Thank you, Brett, and welcome everybody. We felt like heading into 2020, many of us are looking ahead and planning out how we can have the best year possible. And of course, a lot of that is us thinking about how do we ensure better performance. So if you're hoping to improve performance this year, we really are solid believers here at Lattice in feedback as the way to deliver the best results. Great performance in a job isn't something that just comes magically. It is a process. So we always start with thinking about how do you get employees to want to do their best work. So the first way we look at it is, first of all, helping them understand what's expected of them. So that helps give them a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. So 70% of employees in one survey wanted to say that they want to see how their job contributes to the company's strategy. So that sense of direction will help establish a sense of purpose. Secondly, they have a safe place for receiving constructive feedback. We always think that nobody wants to hear the bad news, but actually in one HBR survey, 92% of respondents said that negative feedback is delivered appropriately is effective at improving performance. So they do want to hear that. Thirdly, they feel supported with insights about how they're performing. And I think this is such an obvious one. Everybody wants to hear some specifics about how they're performing to help improve what they do in their job. And then lastly, they also want to be recognized for what they're doing and that they're doing great work. So 69% of employees say they would work harder if they felt their efforts were better recognized. So these all seem obvious to, I think, a lot of people leaders, but we want to make sure that for 2020, if you're thinking about improving performance, that you keep these things in mind. So what does this really roll up to? Is we want people to feel like a performance review is never going to be a surprise. And a lot of the way that we get to that is through feedback culture. And this is sort of like a mini motto for us here at Lattice. We're very into performance reviews and making sure that they're a great experience, but We also think that that starts with the manager and with the company itself. Employees need to feel like they are ready through continuous coaching, two-way conversations along the way, that they're going to deliver their best performance. That continuous feedback culture will allow you to tweak, fix, and improve as you go, and always help the employee know always where they stand, so creating greater satisfaction at work. So today we're going to talk about a few things that relate to this, to helping us get to feedback culture that is really effective for improving performance. Number one is the value of culture and values. Number two is the importance of goals, that helping people feel like they understand the purpose of what they're doing. Thirdly is empowering success. That means making people feel like they know what success looks like and that they can get there. And then lastly, that motivating with rewards and recognition and why that's important. So I'm going to hand it off to Kathy now, who's going to talk about building feedback culture. She's going to talk about that first step of values.
All right, I'm excited to be here with everybody, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion about performance. So let's talk about the culture element and why culture has to be a focus if you're talking about high performance, because that's really where it starts. This is about more than just capturing hours, that it's more than sitting in your chair. This is about capturing hearts and minds and getting everything out of the talent that you've already hired. It needs to start with how you inspire people. And I think it's important to already rely on the tools you should have in your company. And if you don't have them, maybe that should be a place to start, is do you have mission, vision, and values? Now what's important here is codifying it. It doesn't matter if you have something different than somebody else. It's important to be authentic, what matters in your business. But as you think about it, how do these things help guide employees related to the work that they do themselves, how they perform? So for example, here are the 7 values at Bamboo HR. And maybe this is a place where we're focusing on our value of lead from where you are. That is really there to encourage people. You don't need a title to do great things. Within your role, within your sphere of influence, make magic happen. The other thing to think about with mission and vision and values is how does it inspire and guide employees in their work with others. So this is that interacting opportunity, and a big one that we use here is our Be Open value, where we do have an expectation that you will go have the hard conversations, that you will give feedback if there's a gap between what was expected and the actual performance. We couple it with our value of assume the best, so that we approach it assuming that the person didn't intend for any negative outcomes, but that they thought they were on the right path. And so it's about coming together to solve problems, not just to have blame or even enter like a CYA phase where you're starting to have politics that can harm your business. Annette, do you want to share what you do with values at Lattice?
Yeah, absolutely. We're also very big believers in values in driving everything that we do here. We make our values, which you can see here on this slide, a big part of almost everything we do from a people perspective. We incorporate it into our interview process and hiring process. We make this a big part of our onboarding. We also make this a part of our praise system. So when people are delivering public positive feedback over Slack, we have little icons on our Slack channel that sort of say which praise this rolls up to which value. So looking at this, as you can see, ours, we have 4, and we're a startup that's still growing, so a lot of our values are built on helping the company see that we're a little scrappy, we want to help each other out. It's not about doing just your job always. It's actually more about getting the job done and helping the company get ahead. So a couple of them that I love to point out, one of my favorites is Shipmate Self, which is about putting company and teammates ahead of ourselves. So the priority is always accomplishing company and team goals, doing what's needed to help to get where we need to go, even if it's not on your personal goal list or in your particular job function. We're all a company of owners, and we act like it is in the description, and it's just such a great one in terms of like getting people rallied to be all on the same team, not just on their own personal team. And another I really love is Chop Wood, Carry Water, has a similar sentiment. This one is about doing and celebrating great work versus just a specific outcome. So we try to celebrate these specific wins that happen in the work that gets done, not necessarily like whether we landed a customer or whether we launched a specific product in a certain way. It's more about the good work that's done behind the scenes. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Cassie, to talk about cultural changes.
Great. I love those values, and it's fun to see how every company does it different, and I think that's important to acknowledge, is there's no silver bullet here. But care enough about what your mission, vision, values are that you make it work. So another thing to keep in mind is we didn't always have 7 values here at Bamboo HR. We actually started out with 5, and then over time we added 1. And then a little bit later, we added our 7th value, and I'm sharing it here with you. It's our Make It Count value, because we saw that there was a gap in how we were addressing performance and kind of getting stuff done. And so it was important to us to go and add this value to kind of evolve with what was going on with the business. Another thing to keep in mind is you don't have to change your values, but you can do things to help reinforce and better define what those values mean. So a couple of years ago, we had a theme that was all in. And every month we took one of our company values and said, what does this mean in the middle of doing your work? And we had a company-wide behavior that we were teaching everybody to do that month. But then in divisions and departments, they were also looking at it and talking about what this value looks like on the ground. And it was really cool to see that people took this value a mile further than it had ever been before. So you can be creative with what you already have. You don't have to keep changing it and adding more, but be willing to be flexible about how you use those values to teach and reinforce good behaviors, or even to develop and promote new behaviors. Now, an important element that is core in having a culture that drives high performance is psychological safety. This cannot be sacrificed if you want to have both a good culture and if you want high performance. Psychological safety is defined as not being afraid to be punished if you make a mistake, right? Being willing to own up to mistakes, and it's more about a willingness for human beings to be problem solvers than blame pointers. And I love this quote by Paul Santagata, and he's with Google. And as he runs that Google Retail division, this is his approach. He said, in Google's fast-paced, high-demanding environment, our success hinges on the ability to take risks and be vulnerable in front of peers. It's easy to say, but sometimes it can be really hard to do. So what do you do in your company to not just say we do this, but to prove that we do this? An example here at Bamboo HR is we have what we call an OOPS email. And when it's appropriate, we ask individuals to raise their hand and share what had happened, what went wrong, what they learned from it, and what they're going to do going forward to prevent the mistake. And here's why we value this so much. We're trying to make sure that the person who sits next to them and does a very similar job doesn't also learn by making that same mistake. I mean, talk about company debt and company drag. If we're all making the same mistake and we only ever learn if we do it ourselves, that's expensive, and in no way is it nimble or agile. So we love doing that. But then we have to follow through, right? Does this person get written up because of the mistake they made? Now, in HR, we all know that there are times that are appropriate for it to impact somebody's kind of record and what's going on. But for the most part, you want to make sure you've developed ways that people can acknowledge mistakes, fix mistakes, but also teach others how to not make the same mistake. So when you're looking at, do I have psychological safety in my organization, and try to compare that to how do I achieve great work, How am I having high performance and accountability be a focus? Think about it through this kind of a grid matrix where you're really measuring each spectrum and looking at those opportunities. When you can see that people are learning, you're doing it right. But if you're having a moment where perhaps you've got someone in the anxiety zone, then you know that something feels unsafe and you should be reacting to that, talking about it. So an example, one of my team members, I was talking with them the other day and we were kind of having our normal one-on-one, and they were acting a little bit nervous. I was like, what is going on? This is a normal meeting. There's nothing on my radar as to why. And in their eyes, they had been doing a little bit mediocre in their role. I had seen some of the behaviors but didn't see it as a long-term pattern, so I wasn't super worried about it. But they were concerned because they didn't know how I felt about it. And so I loved talking about it and just saying, hey, what's going on? I'm feeling a little bit of nervousness, or you're holding back. What are you thinking? And just a willingness to talk about it can get you probably 90% of the way there. But this is a great framework to present to leadership, to share with managers, and help them think through some of the performance issues they're having and how they can also create that psychological safety in your organization. Here's a little bit more of a detailed path that you can follow that can support the ideas presented in that framework. The first one, and this is information from an article in the Harvard Business Review, and this was actually working with Mr. Santagata over at Google, where they did this in-depth study about what does it actually take to develop safety in a team and really promote best performance. And so the first one is to approach conflict as a collaborator, not as an adversary. I like to call this one hugging the cactus. It's hard. A lot of us have instinctive avoidance reactions to conflict or to approaching a difficult issue, or even to raise our hand for accountability on a mistake that is made. So how are you going to teach people to find win-win outcomes? Really asking ourselves, how could we achieve a mutually desirable outcome, is a great way to approach it. That's one of the key concepts taught in a book, Crucial Conversations, where you can really come together and solve problems together when you're focused through that mutual outcome perspective. The second one that they found and recommended is speaking human to human. Every one of us wants to feel valued. We want to feel secure. We want to feel trusted. The creator of Kid President, Brad Montague, he reminds himself with this phrase. He says, I'm just a human being who wants to be loved. We actually had him come speak at our All Hands Company Update last month. And for me, that was probably the highlight of my day, is being reminded in the middle of trying to do business and meet deadlines and the to-do list, going back to that human aspect. And so this is one of those phrases that I want to put on my whiteboard and keep up for the next year, as just remember to be human and care in the conversation. A lot of times we think that love doesn't belong in the workplace. And you don't have to be obviously inappropriately affectionate, but what we're talking about here is being understanding, being relatable, and genuinely appreciating people for being there, not because they're a great achiever, but because they're there to help. Okay, the third item is anticipate reactions and plan countermoves. I love this. This is actually something I'm uniquely good at, and I love to teach others how to do that. Do you know the people you're working with? Do you understand the natural barriers? What's going to get in the way? And I love troubleshooting the roadblocks that we're going to hit in a project before we even start. The same thing can be done on just kind of interpersonal interactions. I do a lot of coaching for individuals, helping them look ahead in the conversation and how is the other person likely to react. And so should you change the way you approach it, or should you be prepared with other ways to explore the topic or still drive forward to a decision or a consensus? The fourth one is to replace blame with curiosity. And so this is about adopting a different mindset. and acknowledging that I am not all things. I probably don't have all the facts. And so they recommend that you state the problematic behavior or outcome as an observation, that you want to just be factual and use neutral language. So for example, in the past 2 months, there's been a noticeable drop in your participation during meetings, and progress appears to be slowing on your project. It's not super accusatory, but there's a couple of facts that are quantifying what the issue is. And then you want to engage and explore. You want to ask for solutions. So in our onboarding program, we actually have a Crucial Conversations workshop, and we teach the state facts, share conclusions, and then invite sharing for the other person. Same concept here, where I'm sharing the details I have, I'm letting you know the impact it has, and then we're going to work together to fix it. The fifth one is asking for feedback on how you delivered the message. I think we rarely want to volunteer for this. If you want to create psychological safety, there is no better experience than after having a crucial conversation, stop the conversation and ask how you delivered it. Be prepared to receive critical feedback and show that it's okay and it helps us learn. Ask questions like, what worked and what didn't work in my delivery? How did it feel to hear this message? How could I have presented it more effectively? And then you want to be measuring the psychological safety. It's good to think that we're accomplishing it, but it's not up to us to measure. I, as the individual giving the feedback, am not the one to grade how well it went if there was psychological safety. It's actually the other person that gets to determine that outcome. So those are 6 things that you can be doing in your organization to create psychological safety as a pattern. Now let's go ahead and shift gears and look at the performance side and what we can do with goals.
All right, thank you so much, Kathy. That's such important information. Psychological safety is the #1 thing that's going to help all of these things we're about to cover in performance actually be effective. But let's dig into the first step of our performance sort of planning. That is establishing and communicating goals. If you think about it, when you want employees to perform well, if they don't know what's expected of them, how can they know how to reach or exceed expectations of their job? That's why goals and OKRs are so important. Setting them clearly, establishing milestones for success, and communicating regular and clear direction around those goals is what's going to really set them up to feel like they're going to be successful. So let's jump into the first step of that. I always like to think that choosing a framework for how you set goals is super important as the beginning. I think there's like sometimes an obvious choice, like a company has like a established goal setting framework, like they always do OKRs, they always do individual goals or team goals. So let's look at a couple of systems here. OKRs, they're meant to put, this stands for objectives and key results. This puts goals into a framework that establishes goals around a business objective, and it's easy to ladder up to we can start from these big goals at the top of the company goal tree and cascade down to teams and individuals. So that is a system of connecting goals together. The second system is SMART goals, which views goals in isolation, but may be better in some cases for smaller teams that don't need as much of that connected goal structure. So I put SMART is an acronym, and I put the graphic into this slide to show you what it stands for. This is really just a checklist of things that each goal should meet: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. A lot of these apply to setting SMART objectives and key results too, so don't lose the idea of SMART, but this is more like if you have a smaller team and you don't have a system of OKRs at your company, and maybe you want to start working on goals in a smaller way. Either way, you'll want to choose one and help employees rally around and set expectations. The good thing is that we do think that you can use goals to do a lot of things, like communicate what to focus on, what to block out, more importantly, I feel like sometimes. Track progress and motivate employees. You can help employees define and meet their own career and development milestones. They can show different initiatives, how they're connected to each other, that sense of purpose once again, and give employees direction while supporting their autonomy. So that's why it's so important to start with goals first. Here at Lattice, we use OKRs as our system. So this went forward more than one, sorry about that. So I want to walk through what the OKRs mean and how do you set effective ones for your company and your team. So OKRs are built around two different questions. So if you're setting an objective, you want to ask, where do I want to go? If you're setting a key result, you want to ask, how will I get there? And key results will always ladder up to the objective. So in the end, if you actually accomplish all your key results under an objective, you should be able to count that objective as complete. So it's very important to think about setting the right objectives and then using the right framework for setting key results that ladder up to that objective. So how do you set great objectives? I listed a few bullet points here to keep in mind. Each level of an organization, company, team, and individual should have 3 to 5 objectives per level. Objectives should have an achievable finite endpoint. So I give an example here, expand to China, rather than an ongoing task like make progress on an international expansion. So you want to make sure it sets like a defined endpoint. Then thirdly, objectives push beyond what seems possible and should feel like a little bit uncomfortable. So just to give you some context, Google considers success as achieving 70% of an objective, and achieving 100% is considered remarkable performance, almost impossible. So you really want to push your ability, like what you think the company can achieve or the team can achieve with those objectives. Now for key results, it's a little different. You still want to set roughly 3 key results per objective, but key results should be more measurable. So, open 10 stores in China rather than expand to China, which would be the objective. So you want to set these very measurable results. There are also actionable steps that need to be completed to achieve the objective. And then lastly, you want to describe outcomes rather than activities. So that means publish a conversion funnel report. So that's the outcome versus just analyzing conversion as an activity. Now the next step is you want to establish the cadence for how you roll OKRs out. So I put a graphic here on the right side. This is really, I want to be really clear, this is just a sample of one type of cycle. You want to customize this for your own company, of course. This can be annual, this can be quarterly, and to be honest, here at Lattice, we actually look at OKRs every quarter just to make sure that we feel good about the OKRs from the top down, that we feel like they're still in line with our business needs, that they don't feel impossible to reach given market conditions or things that are happening within the company. So you want to constantly be looking at this. Again, that continuous feedback culture starts with OKRs. So how do you start creating that cycle? Let's walk through a few steps here. So in this example, in November, the management team identifies 3 to 5 core company objectives, either yearly or quarterly. Also, you want to decide on a system for alignment, and I listed the 2 at the bottom. First is strict alignment, which is sort of known more commonly as cascading goals. Objectives are defined by the key results of the previous level of the organization. So it starts with the company, and then the next level down ladders up to the company, and then so on. And so everything should be directly and strictly connected. Second is directional. So objectives are directionally aligned with the higher level goals. This is how we do it here at Lattice. It's less about that strict alignment. It's more like, let's try to do everything across the organization to directionally align with those big goals. Then the next step is you're going to want to meet with teams and department heads to start rolling out company OKRs. And then also, roughly around the same time frame, have an all-hands rollout of OKRs to the entire company. This year at Lattice, like our CEO, Jack Altman, sent this out as an email and went really in depth with like a breakdown of each of the 3 big objectives that he set for 2020. So we can have open and honest conversations in each of our team meetings and in our one-on-ones about what we want to do next year because we already know where the leadership team stands on those OKRs. Then the next phase is managers helping ICs kick off an individual OKR writing process. So you want to, obviously, managers, you want to have the team OKRs in hand when you're working with either your managers or your ICs to write those OKRs going forward. I mean, here we like to start with the first quarter, and I mean, if we can set second quarter OKRs for teams and ICs, that's great. But don't try to get too far ahead if you don't know enough information to make smart decisions about OKRs. Then once those are rolled out, then obviously you want to present those OKRs to each other and make sure everybody has a strong understanding, not just of what the team and the company is trying to accomplish, but also like there's a sense of accountability with ICs and teams to deliver on those results. And then finally, you sort of switch into managing and monitoring those OKRs. And then that becomes part of the next phase of the cycle. I'm going to hand it off to Cassie here. It's going to talk a little bit further about how to keep OKRs going at your organization.
This is great, and I love the calendaring that goes into creating that success. One other thing to think about when you look at goals, OKRs, we tend to think about time frames, deadlines, but don't forget about how you're going to keep driving that, especially when you're working in long-term stretches. So I took band growing up, and I love being a band nerd. And when you're in a marching band, the key to success is how many bass drums do you have. So depending on how large your band is, depends on how many bass drums you need. And I like to use that analogy because if I'm in an instrument section in the very front of the band, can I even hear what's happening? And so how are you getting water to the end of the row? How are you maintaining a drum beat for
the organization? How are you going to do that? And this is where I think you should look carefully at your people. Absolutely, your frontline managers should be ready to go and participating. Your HR team will be participating. We know that senior leadership plays a critical role, but also don't forget to look at everyday frontline employees. These are people who might be natural culture leaders on your team, or even technical experts that people turn to for kind of getting work done support and needs. These are people that you want to rally together to help remind people, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going. And then when you start to have priority conflicts, do I do this or do I do this? Which one is more important? People know who to go to. They know to speak up, ask, make sure that they're not making decisions in isolation. Another thing to keep in mind is I'm a big believer in using visual reminders. I love to have things in the work environment around people. We have probably about 30% of our employees work remotely. And so even there, trying to say, what are we putting in front of those team members to remind them this is the goal we're focused on, this is the theme, whatever it is that we're doing to help motivate and inspire the work that's getting done. So think about what you can do visually in the work environment. Look at the meetings that you do. It's great to look at your all-hands meeting. That's a great time to drive overall alignment. But even down into your department meetings and almost more importantly, into your one-on-ones, managers meeting face-to-face with the people who are executing on these OKRs and goals. And then looking at the way that the work is assigned. Either keeps you on track, rowing together, or it starts to create this dissonance. And so those are a couple of other ways to think about how you keep everybody focused and keep that drum beating to be on pace to hit your goals to achieve excellence. All right, let's shift gears here. And we've got goals in place. We've talked about psychological safety. Now, how are you going to go empower your people to really step up and take control of their own success? And this is where I want to talk about healthy accountability. Who's supposed to own these goals? Who's supposed to own OKRs? Who's responsible for solving problems or for making sure that progress is actually happening along the way? I love the book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And one of the principles that they teach in there is, she calls it, give the pen back. And the idea is, many times as a manager, a team member is going to approach us and say, I have this problem, and kind of put it on the desk in front of you. And sometimes we as managers have this harmful instinct of, I'm going to step up and help. I'm going to take this problem, I'm going to pick it up and grab it and run it across to the end zone. And we shouldn't be doing that. What you want to learn to do is to give it back to them and let them solve the problems. So yes, absolutely, you should be listening and be supporting when an employee is handling a hurdle or hits a roadblock. But ultimately you want to allow them to author their own solution. Do not solve the problem for them. Be a stakeholder that A, holds them accountable to problem solve, but B, is a resource to help make sure you get to a good, healthy solution. So you want to think about, how do managers support their people in that way? One of the things that I like to do is run it through a framework that I learned through Influencer, where they're really talking about how can you drive change? How can you create a different outcome? And so they have this 6-factor influence model where you're talking about, is it motivation or is it ability? So can they or will they is how I like to frame it. When working with managers, we tend to over-instinctively say, well, I'm just going to go train more. If I do more training, the problem will fix, it'll get better. Well, yes and no. A lot of times it's hard for us to say, this is technically a motivation issue. Now, maybe that person has a great attitude. You can tell that they're trying. It's just still not happening. The fact that I can technically do the task means it isn't about training. It's a motivation issue. And then helping people to look at these 3 factors that can influence either ability or motivation really helps you root problem cause, identify, and then find long-term solutions. So for example, is it a personal motivation issue? Do I just not like that kind of work? Is it work I don't understand? It's not native to the way I think. Looking at that is important. Second, social. The other people around you, are they promoting getting things done, adopting the new behavior, or do they have on purpose or even accidental behaviors that get in the way? For example, I work with a tremendous talent acquisition team, and they're super, super busy. But we're also highly engaged with the people that they just spent time hiring. So they're interacting with employees and talking to them. Well, it can be hard to do both sometimes. And so they needed to help others, enable them getting talent acquisition work done. And so they ended up adopting a queue system so that when people come by their workspace, they know if they're really in this place of, I'm working hard and shouldn't be disturbed unless it's an emergency that can't wait. Because we had this accidental social behavior of a new hire coming by to talk to their recruiter that they built this great connection with. And what it was doing was interfering with that recruiter reaching out to the next person we're trying to hire. And then looking at the structural things around you. This is more technology and resources that they have, the actual work environment around them, things that get in the way of people doing something. So this is a great framework that will help you really identify what can change. As I work with managers who are trying to broaden, do something new or different, we kind of talk through this framework. And the goal is, if you can at least get 4 of these squares working for you, you're more likely to get a permanent outcome. But if you're getting less than that, you're going to meet resistance along the way and probably continue to have issues with achieving that goal that you're thinking about. So let's look at how we can incorporate feedback as we're looking at these goals, OKRs, and now getting ownership into driving success.
Okay, great. Yeah, I love that framework of ability and motivation. I think a lot of the practices from that can be put into action through the meetings and practices of feedback culture. So feedback, the way we think about it here, is always continuous, it's ongoing, and it's this communication structure that helps keep managers, teams, individuals on track to success so that, again, there's never a surprise. I think that idea of like those conversations about finding out, you know, whether they feel like they have too much work or whether they feel like they're not equipped to take on a responsibility, a lot of those can happen in these feedback conversations. So it always, in our point of view, starts with the one-on-ones. And I always think of this as the most important meeting of the week. I really, really wish more managers did. This should be this time that you set aside, that your managers are setting aside actually, for their people to have a two-way conversation. It's obviously an opportunity to review OKR progress and adjust work and adjust needs, but it's also a way for them to tell you how happy they are. Are they engaged? Are they going through personal issues? All those things that affect performance and happiness in the job. Then secondly, we want to put requesting feedback into action. So managers and employees should ask for 360 feedback. So managers asking their reports for feedback, managers asking their managers for feedback, employees asking peers, and so on. This is a great way for people to get an understanding of how they're perceived, whether or not they're being a blocker. It can open up a lot of things that sort of remain hidden just because no one asked. The third one is praise or positive feedback. This is one that sort of goes, I think, overlooked a lot because we all get so busy. It's tough to keep up with just providing even the constructive feedback. But we should always stop and take a moment and provide praise at key moments, like either team or project or individual wins. And then lastly, I call this the big checkup. Obviously, performance reviews are that sort of like, you know, if we were, you know, all doctors and patients, this is our physical. This is when you find out how you are performing against expectations, how you're helping your team, how you're helping the company. This is when you actually get the feedback about like how well you did after all of these other pieces of feedback culture have already happened. So hopefully if everything is being communicated in all those different steps of one-on-ones, of requesting feedback, by the time you get to the review phase, there should not be a surprise about what that review will be. So next we're going to go on to my favorite topic in feedback culture, which is around rewards and recognition. So this is a big part of culture here at Lattice. We love public praise. We even built it into our product, but that's because the people that receive recognition have better morale, it improves retention, it improves happiness, makes people feel like they want to be more productive, they want to perform better. Of the people who reported the highest morale at work in an OC Tanner study, 94% agreed that their managers are effective at giving recognition. So a little recognition goes a long way, and there are a lot of companies and a lot of managers who never deliver great praise and recognition, and those are the people that scare away good employees. So I wanted to just list out a few key moments that we like to recommend for managers to give praise. They may seem smaller and insignificant, but to the employee it feels incredibly valuable, and it makes them really boost their happiness. So the first one we always like to recommend is when they get hired and when they're onboarding. So these are within the employee's first weeks. This is a crucial time for them to understand their place in the organization, help them understand the company culture, the expectations of their job. So we want to let them know that they're on the right track, that they're welcome, that they're a big addition to the team, and how they'll fit in. This also frames it for the entire company if you're sending this out company-wide. 2 is when they get promoted. This feels obvious, but sometimes it goes unnoticed when someone gets promoted. When your employee finally gets elevated into a position that they've worked hard to achieve, it's super important to celebrate that big career move in a big way. Thirdly is when they go out of their comfort zone. I feel like this looks like a small one, but I love this one a lot. When an employee takes on a new responsibility, builds a process from scratch that didn't exist before, maybe learns a new skill that's going to benefit them in the long run, cheering them on, even if it's just at a team level, will go a really long way to making them feel ownership and happiness around doing a great job. After a big launch that they helmed is another one. Even if it's something your team has been working on for a long time, if they headed up a major project and you want to show that they exhibited great leadership and help the company, it's great to give them a little feedback, give them a little public praise to go along with that. Next is when they go above and beyond expectations. So obviously, it's hard. I feel like most people feel like it's hard to keep up with their own jobs, but once they actually step up and take on more and go above and beyond, you want to show some love and give a little, show that you were delighted and surprised by how well they did. Next is another obvious one. This one gets celebrated a lot, but don't forget when they have an anniversary at the company, we want to make sure that we show that they've hit this major milestone of working at a company for 1 or more years. And really it should, the manager as their personal coach through the whole thing should acknowledge and celebrate that moment. And the last one is when they're trying something new or risky in front of a lot of people. This one connects to the comfort zone one, but this is really about when they do their first all-hands presentation or they're managing more people, that sort of thing, where they're actually being seen by others as stepping up and doing something a little bit risky. Let them know that you're proud of them, even if it's just one-on-one praise, and it will really help make them feel supported as they're taking on something that feels a little scary. All right, now I'm going to hand it off to Cassie, who's going to talk us through Progress Principle. Love.
Yeah. No, this is a great list. The only thing I would add to it is keep in mind that there are actually marker points for us as humans that are outside of the employment specter. For example, when people hit markers like 30 years old and 40 years old, they're contemplating their lives. They're thinking about things, and there's a lot of data out there talking about how to engage employees and keep them focused and knowing that they're appreciated and motivated. So go do some Googling and see what you find. All right, let's look at the Progress Principle. This is one that I like because this is the idea of how do you create that natural runner's high just by doing the work. And so adopting a Progress Principle into your culture is a huge way to do that. And I love this quote by Teresa Amabile. One of the things that can boost emotions, motivation, and perceptions during a workday, the single most important is making progress in meaningful work. I read this and I almost laughed out loud because I thought, sometimes I'll leave work and I'm like, meh, it was an okay day, whatever, I did work, nothing mattered. And then sometimes I get home from work and my husband is like, take a chill pill. You are bouncing off the walls, excited, and so I'll just step back and go, all right, what's going on with Cassie? Why is there a difference? And it was because I did something meaningful. I finished something. I got something hard done. And I did. I go home with this natural high, and I'm excited the next day when I come back in. So how can we tap into that within our organizations? So one important factor is to make sure that you're measuring progress. I love this graphic. So this is a graphic of how to take work and break it down into more meaningful measurements. Right? When we talk about sometimes our OKRs or goals are pretty long term and they last a long time. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to get my runner's high off of that. And so looking at it more from a win perspective, where can I measure wins? Where can I measure accomplishment? So this is from an author and podcast creator, Jocelyn K. Glee. I probably said her name wrong, Glei, if you want to Google it. But she was, so she's an author, and then she wanted to start doing podcasts. And in order to really get this whole progress principle embedded to help drive and encourage this super ambitious new project she was going to launch on, she pulled out a piece of paper to try and break it down. So she was doing things to create daily quotas. And one of the most important things she did is every day she would start from zero again. And I thought about that as I was studying it. I thought, do I actually believe that? And so I tried it a couple of times. And I would maintain a list and come in the next day and pick up in the middle of it. And then I didn't do that, and I would start from zero again. And it was so much more effective when I started from zero because I didn't feel like I was in the slog of where I was at yesterday. There were new hills to climb, new things to do. One of the things that we did as a company a couple of years back is we were trying to help eliminate distractions in work. And so we decided that as a company, we called it the Morning High Five. We asked everybody to find an accountability partner, and everyone would take the first 5 minutes of the day to identify and write on a piece of paper that would be right there at their desk the most important things they needed to get done that day. And so the goal was to say, if you did anything else besides those things, why? Why did that become a priority? What happened? What influenced that decision? Because we were trying to be deliberate about getting stuff done. And then after you did that, you were supposed to go to your accountability partner and say, yep, I did my prioritization, and we would give each other a high five. So it was fun every morning to see everybody high-fiving each other. It was interactive, but it was also setting this cultural, social expectation of I'm doing it, you do it. And now we follow up and we deliver. So that was one of the ways that we tried to break down things on a daily basis, and then we're visually recognizing the work during that high-five moment each morning as we have accountability. Did we do it? Did we not? And then I've completed my new priorities for the day. Another thing to do is to reflect in writing. Reflect on the progress. Identify the small wins or even the small setbacks. You know, there's something interesting about the human brain. When you take the time to take that data, that thought, the idea in your head, and put it into physical writing. It doesn't work with keyboards. You have to physically have a writing implement and use paper. Your brain processes the information differently. And I think that there's a really powerful way for people to recognize progress, growth, success, and even healthy ways to embrace failure and opportunities to learn by writing. Now, you have to be disciplined. Who takes the time for that? You have to care enough to say, this is what I'm doing, and then commit to it. And then think about those visual opportunities, whether it's a tracker that's doing things, a scorecard, maybe there's a calendar that helps best to do it. There's a cool tool called Rescue Time. You can go look it up and talk about how are you measuring, this is how my time was spent and it was effective. Okay, we've covered a lot today, so let me back up and just kind of do some takeaways. Your employees have untapped potential, I guarantee it. So when you structure your performance managers, your performance management managers, leadership to focus on the development of these individuals, and you're using the right tools to evaluate and give feedback, this is where you're able to really drive this high performance, this better performance that you're looking for. This is going to help you have additional insight into how employees feel about their work experience. It helps you identify opportunities for development for individuals. And of course, there's improved engagement, communication, collaboration. All of those things happen in better ways. I can't stress enough how well-trained managers can lower performance or improve performance. So make sure that you're investing in your leadership team to accomplish that. And if traditional performance management focuses on this kind of take it or leave it, then this more employee-centered performance management is where you're focusing on what employees and the organization have to give to each other. And making that shift isn't going to happen overnight. But if it's the priority and you evaluate some of these opportunities that we shared, it's really worth it. And so thumbs up for all the efforts you're going to do. We wish you success in that. And I think we've got some time right now for some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cassie and Annette. That was amazing, amazing content. And I know we're starting to run short on time, but we do have some great questions. We'll start off with this first one. It is, how can we coach employees to feel confident in having difficult conversations with colleagues, their direct manager, etc.? We'll let Annette take the lead on this question, and then we'll have Cassie follow up.
Okay, great. I actually will point to some of the things that Cassie said about that psychological safety. A lot of those tips in there will really help people with tough conversations, especially this idea of like approaching it as a collaborator, approaching it from a curiosity, not a blame. It's really like opening up to those, asking questions and trying to learn about what are the problems, even if it's just like, why do you have a tough time getting feedback from others? Just opening up that conversation, having them share their personal insights, and then using that to sort of form the solution. I don't know, Cassie, if you have a different take on that.
Well, I think in addition to that, a couple more ways to look at it. Teach people. Sometimes we think that just because you're an adult and you have a job, you know these skills, that you know how to do this. We all come from different kinds of backgrounds, and so don't assume people know how to. So here at Bamboo HR, all new hires go through an onboarding program, and I believe I mentioned it earlier, but one of our classes is a workshop on having crucial conversations, and we actually practice it. In the class, we're teaching them how to have this conversation. So we do that. Another tip I might offer is there's a great TED Talk by Sheila Heen, and she talks about feedback and kind of the psychological journey that we go on as human beings. So a couple of years ago, I built like this self-guided tool that teams and individuals can use, where you plot out what are your instinctive reactions to feedback so that I can be better as a person at receiving feedback, not just giving it. We tend to focus a lot on giving. And it was really helpful for people to better understand themselves and then identify when they were having less than healthy reactions and weren't able to engage in the conversation. So train them how to do it, but also teach them how they are as a human and help them develop new skills to communicate better around those difficult conversations and sometimes confrontations that you need to have with coworkers and even direct managers.
Perfect. The next question, our last one, it will be, is it necessary to have reviews if you have a feedback culture? We'll let Cassie take the lead on this one, and then we'll have Annette follow.
Okay, is it necessary? I guess I want to change the question to, what do you use reviews for? Is it necessary? Yes and no. When you think about performance reviews, you should be deliberate about what you use them for in your company. Yes, they're meant to help an individual and a manager communicate about getting work done, but there's also kind of some bigger company layers that performance management can be used for. Meaning, are you able to evaluate the effectiveness of your workforce so that you can look at additional resources, programs, initiatives that might help you be more successful next year? Performance management data is super helpful there. It can help influence hiring forecasting needs. And then of course with performance, I hope it's impacting compensation. It should. It feels quite natural for me that those should go hand in hand. So if you're choosing to not have an annual, semi-annual, or you define the frequency, but if you're choosing to not have that in your business, I still think it's important to have a time where you lock down, this is the state of the state as it were, for individuals, for teams, and for the company. I think that data is super useful. So that's the way that I would think to look at it. Annette, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that having reviews does, even if it's in a lightweight way, provides a way for managers and HR to document how well an employee or manager is performing in their role. It helps drive all those things, but it gives you compensation, succession planning, all of that, but then it also gives you a written documentation of why you can justify that case or have a tougher conversation. Secondly, I think that it depends on how healthy that feedback culture is. Is the feedback culture actually providing that structure that an annual or semi-annual review would give? Is that documentation coming through in the feedback culture? Maybe then that would say no, you're good to go. The third thing I would say is that I think that employees genuinely do crave some sort of finite feedback about how well they did for the year or over a course of time. So having that sort of stake in the ground where you can sort of say you did a fantastic job from point A to point B, even though you've had all these conversations in between, you still got to point B and you have this very specific set of accomplishments, and then the employee feels like they can decide, am I happy in the job? Do I feel like I'm being recognized? But also, am I sort of top of the game? And I can use that for career development down the line and tout that in my next role. So that's all I would add.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, both Annette and Cassie. That's going to be the time for us. Thank you all again so much for joining us for today's webinar. We hope you've been able to take some great takeaways that you can start implementing in your organization to improve your performance. If you enjoyed today's webinar, check out our content library for more great webinars. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording and slide deck from today's webinar to all registrants within the next 3 business days. So be watching your inbox and spam folder for that. We'll also automatically send out SHRM credit to anyone who attended for at least 50 minutes. We want to give a big shout out to our partner Lattice. Thanks again so much for teaming up with us on today's webinar and for sharing your insights and best practices. Please make sure to reach out to our presenters on LinkedIn. They'd love to connect with you. And follow Bamboo HR and Lattice on social media. We both regularly deliver great content that can help elevate your teams and organizations, and we'd love to see you at our next webinar. Thank you so much.